This morning, we'll be talking about an important health topic, diabetes. Every November, we observe National Diabetes Month, a time dedicated to raising awareness about diabetes, its risk factors, and effective ways to manage it. We'll explore the importance of early detection and proper management, as well as practical strategies for prevention and healthy living. Together, let's learn how to take care of our bodies, God's temple, and support one another in living healthier, fuller lives. According to 2024 statistics from the International Diabetes Federation and the CDC, diabetes has reached crisis levels, both here at home and around the world. In the United States alone, nearly 16% of adults are now living with diabetes. That includes over 11% who have been diagnosed, and another 4 to 5% who don't yet know they have it. Among men, the rate is close to 1 in 5, and for women, about 1 in 7. The risk grows higher with age and body weight, showing just how connected this disease is to our lifestyle choices. But the problem isn't just national, it's global. According to the World Health Organization, over 830 million people of all ages are now living with diabetes worldwide. That's more than 4 times the number from just a generation ago, and the impact is heartbreaking. Diabetes is now one of the leading causes of heart disease, kidney failure, and vision loss. In 2021 alone, it claimed 1.6 million lives across the globe. These numbers remind us that we're facing not just a medical problem, but a call to action, to care for our bodies as God's temple, to make wise choices, and to support one another in pursuing health, healing, and wholeness. This is not just about statistics, it's about stewardship of the life God has given us. The 3 main categories of diabetes are type 1 diabetes, an autoimmune condition in which the body's immune system attacks and destroys the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas. It most commonly develops in children and young adults. People with type 1 diabetes require daily insulin injections, regular blood sugar monitoring, and a careful diet management to maintain stable glucose levels. Then there's type 2 diabetes, a metabolic disorder that occurs when the body becomes resistant to insulin or does not produce enough of it. Although traditionally associated with adults, it is now increasingly seen in children and adolescents. Management typically involves lifestyle modifications, such as healthy eating, regular exercise, and weight control, along with oral medications or insulin therapy when needed. Prediabetes is a condition in which the blood sugar levels are higher than normal, but not yet high enough for a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. Prediabetes can develop at any age and serves as a warning sign. With timely lifestyle changes such as improved diet, increased physical activity, and weight management, it is often possible to prevent or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes. In the United States, about 2 million people live with type 1 diabetes. That's roughly 5 to 10% of all diabetes cases. On the other hand, type 2 diabetes affects around 36 million Americans, making up about 90 to 95% of all cases. When we look at the picture worldwide, the pattern is very similar. Type 1 diabetes accounts for about 10% of all cases, while type 2 diabetes makes up the remaining 90%. So, as we can see, type 1 diabetes is much less common than type 2 diabetes, both here in our country and across the globe. And the 2 types also differ in their causes. Type 1 is an autoimmune condition. That means the body's own immune system attacks the cells that make insulin. Type 2, on the other hand, is largely linked to lifestyle factors such as diet, physical activity, and weight management. Let's remember that behind every number in these statistics is a person, a family, a story, and a daily struggle of faith and perseverance. Few people know that there's a surprising connection between fish-borne liver flukes and diabetes. According to a study published on the National Institute for Health's PubMed website, more than 45 million people around the world are infected with what are known as fish-borne liver flukes. These are tiny, parasitic worms that make their home in the liver and bile ducts of mammals, including humans. The most common types are Opisthorchis viverina, found mainly in Southeast Asia, and Clonachus sinensis, often called the Chinese liver fluke. What's alarming is that researchers have found a link between liver fluke infections and higher rates of diabetes, particularly poor blood sugar. The study suggests that these parasites may interfere with the body's normal metabolic processes, leading to insulin resistance, one of the key factors in the development of type 2 diabetes. In other words, the inflammation caused by these infections doesn't just affect the liver, it can ripple through the body, disrupting normal function and increasing the risk of serious health conditions like diabetes. Although human liver fluke infections are rare in the U.S., several invasive species in U.S. waters, including Asian carp, northern snakehead, and specific snail and mussel hosts, can participate in the life cycle of fluke species capable of infecting humans. If consumed, they must be cooked thoroughly to an internal temperature above 145 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a sobering reminder that even small, unseen things can cause great harm, both physically and spiritually, if left unchecked. Another remarkable study published in the August 2023 issue of Diabetes Research and Clinical Practice has shown overwhelming evidence of what God's natural foods can do for our health, demonstrating plant-based diets reducing or eliminating type 2 diabetes. The study, titled "The Acute Effects of a DASH Diet and Whole Food Plant-Based Diet on Insulin Requirements and Related Cardiometabolic Markers in Individuals with Insulin-Treated Type 2 Diabetes," looked at two different plant-based eating patterns: the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, and the whole food, plant-based diet. Researchers found that when people with insulin-treated type 2 diabetes adopted either of these plant-based diets, they experienced rapid and significant improvements. Their need for insulin dropped, insulin resistance went down, cholesterol levels improved, and the inflammation in the body decreased, with greater dietary changes producing greater benefits. In other words, by simply returning to the foods that come from the earth, whole, plant-based foods God created for our nourishment, people saw real, measurable healing take place in their bodies. And the more they embrace these wholesome natural plant foods, the greater the benefits they experienced. Metformin is still the leading first-choice medication for type 2 diabetes because it works well, is affordable, and has a long safety record. But research over the past several years has consistently shown that long-term metformin use is linked with a higher risk of vitamin B deficiency. When researchers combine multiple studies, they commonly find about double the risk, and real-world studies report that roughly 18 to 30% of people who take metformin long-term end up with low B12 levels, depending on dosage, duration, and how deficiency is defined. We also understand why this happens. Metformin interferes with the normal calcium-dependent absorption of the B12 intrinsic factor complex in the lower intestine. Because of this mechanism, the longer someone is on the medicine and the higher the dose, the more likely their levels will drop. Low B12 doesn't always show up dramatically at first. It can cause tiredness, anemia, numbness, or tingling, and in more advanced deficiency, worsening neuropathy or cognitive changes. For people with diabetes, that's especially important because nerve symptoms might be blamed on diabetes itself, allowing the deficiency to go unnoticed. For that reason, recent reviews and clinical guidance recommend a simple preventive approach. Check a baseline B12 level when someone starts metformin. Recheck periodically, especially in older adults, those on higher doses, or anyone with symptoms. Supplement with B12, oral or injections, if levels drop or signs of deficiency appear. This typically prevents progression and often improves the symptoms. That's the core message. Metformin therapy requires awareness and low-cost screening to prevent an avoidable deficiency in its downstream harms. Diabetologia is the official medical journal of the European Association for the Study of Diabetes. They recently published a study demonstrated that healthy, plant-based diets are linked with a lower risk of developing diabetes in the first place. In other words, they help prevent the disease before it even starts. And truly, prevention is the best medicine. Avoiding disease is far better than having to treat it later. The researchers found that people who regularly eat whole, plant-based foods, things like fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, have a much lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. This is especially significant because over 90% of all diabetes cases are type 2, and this condition has become a major global health concern. Beyond the disease itself, diabetes brings with it many serious complications. It can damage the heart and blood vessels, harm the kidneys, impair vision, and affect the nerves throughout the body. The good news is that much of this epidemic is preventable. The main causes are unhealthy diets, excess body weight, lack of physical activity, and other lifestyle factors. But the same choices that cause the problem can also lead to healing. A diet centered on whole, plant-based foods, such as whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes, has consistently been shown to lower the risk of type 2 diabetes. And while science is still uncovering all the reasons why, the evidence is clear. God's original plan for our nourishment, the simple natural foods of the earth, continues to be the best foundation for lasting health. According to Teresa Sam Houghton, known as the chief nerd at the Modern Health Nerd and a graduate of Bauman College and the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies, the best carbohydrates for people with diabetes are the ones we often fear. She reminds us that not all carbs are created equal. The best choices include beans, which contain resistant starch that doesn't spike blood sugar, whole grains, low-sugar fruits like berries and citrus, non-starchy vegetables such as leafy greens and carrots, and nuts and seeds. But she also warns us to avoid the refined grains, processed sugars, and fruit juices that have had their natural fiber removed, because those are the ones that send blood sugar levels soaring. As we've already seen, science confirms that plant-based diets can lower the risk of diabetes and help manage it more effectively. The real key is simple: increase whole plant foods and reduce unhealthy fats, especially those saturated in trans fats that harm our health. And remember this important truth: carbs are not the enemy. Even though many people with type 2 diabetes are told to stay away from carbohydrates, the research shows that a whole food, plant-based diet rich in natural, wholesome carbs can naturally improve health and bring the body back into balance. Now, church family, let's take a moment to understand something that often gets misunderstood: carbohydrates. Not all carbs are created equal. There are simple carbohydrates like sugars, monosaccharides and disaccharides. Then there are complex carbohydrates such as starches and fibers, known as oligosaccharides and polysaccharides. Most whole plant foods actually contain both kinds, but here's the key difference. When those carbs come packaged by God in their natural form, along with fiber, water, and nutrients, they behave very differently in the body. The fiber slows down how quickly sugar enters our bloodstream, keeping our energy steady and our blood sugar stable. Now, why do whole food, plant-based diets work so well for those managing diabetes? Because they help our bodies become more sensitive to insulin. Slow down sugar absorption through that wonderful fiber. Support healthy weight loss, which further improves how insulin works, and even reduce fat in the liver, something that's a major risk factor for type 2 diabetes. But here's a word of caution. When we take out the fiber, like in fruit juices, we lose that natural protection. The sugar hits the bloodstream fast, and that's when problems can arise. So when it comes to carbs, it's not about avoiding them. It's about choosing the right kind. The type of carbohydrate matters far more than the amount. When we eat foods as God designed them, whole, unprocessed plant food from the earth, They nourish and heal us rather than harm us. As we come to the close of this presentation, let's take a moment to reflect on what the Bible says about our diet, the way God originally designed us to be nourished. In Genesis 1, verse 29, the Lord himself declared, "And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." From the very beginning, God provided humanity with a diet of life, fruits, grains, seeds, and herbs, foods that sustain health, strength, and clarity of mind. Then in Proverbs 26, verse 2, the Bible reminds us, "As the bird by wandering, as the swallow by flying, so the curse causeless shall not come." In other words, the consequences we face, including many of today's diseases, have causes. God has not left us without instruction or guidance on how to live in harmony with his laws of health. Ellen G. White, in Counsels on Diet and Foods, chapter 23, beautifully echoes this truth. "Everything had been destroyed upon which man could subsist, and therefore the Lord in their necessity gave Noah permission to eat of the clean animals which he had taken with him into the ark. But animal food was not the most healthful article of food for man." We live in a world now facing a global epidemic of type 2 diabetes, a disease largely preventable and even reversible through the simple principles found in a whole food, plant-based diet. This truth once again confirms the counsel given long ago through God's messenger, Ellen G. White, a woman with only a third-grade education, yet divinely inspired with wisdom that modern science continues to validate. And just as King Jehoshaphat said in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 20, "Believe in the Lord your God, so shall ye be established. Believe his prophets, so shall ye prosper." Ellen G. White emphasized that grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables are the most nourishing foods, the very foods God designed for us from the beginning. In the Ministry of Health, chapter 23, she wrote that these foods, prepared in as simple and natural a manner as possible, bring strength, endurance, and mental clarity. This is God's original plan for humanity, a plan of life, health, and peace. May we, by his grace, return to it, not just for physical healing, but as an act of spiritual obedience and trust in our Creator.